Welcome to the NC Spin After Spin, opinions from thought leaders in our state. I want to ask Howard Lee and Joe Mavretic, a three-judge panel which had previously stayed a law to combine the State Ethics Commission and the State Board of Education's ruled that the merger of the two could go forward. But their ruling was confusing. In an apparent about-face, the court ruled it didn't have jurisdiction. What's that all about, Howard?
You know, that was very confusing. If they don't have jurisdiction, then why do they say anything at all?
Well, why did they rule the way they did the first time with the stay?
Absolutely. You know, it really does concern me. Combining those two entities does make a lot of sense. I really think the Ethics Committee has a different role than the Education Group, and I really...
Elections Group.
Elections Group. And I really hate to see us going down the road of mixing what I think is alcohol and water.
Joe, your reaction?
Well, I think that the attorney for the governor lost the governor's round. And the reason is that in his comments to the three-judge panel, he talked about the governor being able to appoint people who saw things from the governor's point of view. And that turned it into political. And as soon as it became a political argument, I think that three-judge panel ruled exactly right, saying that this now becomes a subject matter jurisdictional area, and we're not empowered to do this. And so if you are an attorney, you get this. They did exactly what they should have done. And this is just a continuation of what we have talked about on NC Spin for at least a year, that should we have a Democratic governor and a Republican-controlled General Assembly, that it was going to be pass a bill, veto the bill, override the veto, go to the courts. And this is simply one more of those cases. It's intriguing to me, however, that the same panel that said Senate Bill 4 was not constitutional, the same three people, then 2 Ds and 1 R, turned around and said SB 64 was okay, but it got into politics and they had no jurisdiction.
Well, let me ask both of you a follow-up on that. The governor tried to base this on separation of powers. From a purely technical point of view, doesn't the legislature have the authority to be able to create agencies and merge agencies, which then get turned over to the executive branch? Is that not true?
That is correct.
And so how does that jibe with separation of powers other than from an appointive process?
Well, I don't think it does. I think what one should look at is whether or not the functioning of these two bodies will do justice to the expected outcomes of the work of these two bodies. An elections committee was expected to have an outcome that is different from that of an ethics committee. And so it's still, I still go back to my metaphor of mixing water and alcohol. They just don't come together very well. And I think that would be my concern more than the separation of power question.
All right. Well, you know, where we are is in uncharted territory. For a century, a governor was Democratic, a General Assembly was Democratic. So when the General Assembly put together something for the governor to execute, it was pretty much two teams in trace and a horse, in pulling a cart. But now you have very different political views. And so when an attorney for the governor on the Democratic side raises the issue of priorities and views, then those priorities and views become partisan. And here you have an R assembly creating commissions, sections, divisions, and a D governor implementing that from a different partisan point of view.
But isn't the legislature also partisan in their views? I mean, you talked about this being a governor's issue so far as being partisan.
Now, this is an organizational issue. And organizational issues are the priority of the purview of the assembly. And then what those entities do is the responsibility of the
executive
governor.
branch.
but not, this is a construction issue, not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be.
Agree or disagree with that?
I think that there's some merit to what Joe is saying. However, I think another area that plays very heavily in this is philosophy, because I go back to when the state was controlled by Democrats, and that was the infighting between the governor and the legislature, and the infighting within the legislature.
And this
of course,
legislature didn't treat Governor Pat McCrory very well either.
Exactly where I was going to say that if you look at what they did to Governor McCrory, it was not partisan, it was philosophical.
Well,
it was personal.
And
there were some other things too.
well, personal and separation of
Yes,
powers
right.
from
It
that
was-
standpoint.
yeah.
Well, thank you for watching the After Spin. We'll have more video all during the week on ncspin.com.